1. During a steering meeting, sponsor John Miller asks you, PM Rebecca Jones, to start executing a vendor change immediately because the field can't wait. The vendor change adds scope, increases cost, and may breach acceptance criteria. The charter names John as ultimate approver, but the change control board meets weekly. What do you do first? A. Start the change to preserve momentum and log it later. B. Ask John for a documented change request and perform an impact analysis before any work begins. C. Request the vendor split the change into a quick patch and a formal change so you can deliver now. D. Escalate John's instruction to the PMO head and instruct the vendor to stop. Correct answer, B. Explanation. Insist on a documented change request and impact analysis to protect baselines and compliance. Even sponsors must follow change control unless they formally authorize an emergency exception. 2. Senior Manager Arti Sharma repeatedly sends urgent fixes directly to developers, bypassing Scrum Master Mark and the product backlog. Which two actions are most appropriate? Select 2. A. Tell developers to ignore Arti's requests unless they come through Mark or the backlog. B. Document each bypass, notify Arti in writing of the impacts, and copy the project sponsor. C. Create an ad hoc team outside sprint commitments to handle her requests. D. Convene a short meeting with Arti, Mark, and the product owner to re-establish the communication and prioritization process. Correct answers, B and D. Explanation. Create traceability by documenting bypasses and restore the agreed process through a reconciling meeting. Instructing developers to ignore or ad hoc work undermines governance and relationships. 3. Client representative David Clark emails developers a SQL script to fix production data. The script would expose personally identifiable information and violates the data handling clause in the contract. Your immediate response is A. Implement the script and mask PII later. B. Delete the email to avoid conflict. C. Document David's request, halt any deployment, notify security and legal, and propose a compliant, masked dataset alternative. D. Run the script in production overnight to avoid detection. Correct answer, C. Explanation. PII exposure is a legal risk. Document the request, stop deployment, and involve security, legal, to produce compliant alternatives. 4. During UAT, sponsor Priya Singh demands sign-off despite 10 open high-severity defects and threatens to cut the budget if sign-off is delayed. Which two actions are correct? Select 2. A. Provide conditional written sign-off capturing Priya's acceptance of risk and request funds for post-release fixes. B. Refuse sign-off and terminate the contract immediately. C. Escalate to the PMO and legal, present test evidence, and request formal written risk acceptance with contingency plans. D. Reclassify defect severities to meet acceptance. Correct answers, A and C. Explanation. If the sponsor truly accepts the risk, document conditional sign-off with funding and mitigation and escalate to governance, legal to formalize acceptance. Falsifying severities or abrupt termination are inappropriate. 5. Procurement lead. Ravi Kapoor informs you CFO Richard Blake chose a preferred supplier informally because they're trusted partners. But procurement policy requires 3 competitive bids. What is the correct course? A. Proceed with the preferred supplier and complete the 3 bid paperwork retrospectively. B. Tell Richard the 3-bid process must be followed, document his request, and involve procurement to approve a single source exception or run the formal process. C. Cancel procurement and ask the sponsor to find another supplier. D. Hire the preferred supplier on a short consult and then convert. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Follow procurement policy. Document executive request and route through procurement for exception approval or formal competition, retrospective paperwork, or informal hiring risks, compliance breaches. 6. Lead architect Alex Turner keeps receiving technical directives from board member Nisha Kapoor that conflict with the architecture decision record. Which 2 responses are most appropriate? Select 2. A. Implement Nisha's directives immediately to avoid political fallout. B. Document Nisha's emails. Convene an architecture review with Alex and Nisha to reconcile differences and route any agreed changes through configuration control. C. Reply all and publicly call out Nisha for causing confusion. D. Maintain current architecture until changes are formally approved and update the architecture record only after approval. Correct answers: B and D. Explanation: documenting directives, reconciling formally, and using configuration control preserves technical integrity. Public confrontation or unilateral compliance are risky. 7. QA lead. Marcus Patel refuses to sign the release certificate because regulatory tests are incomplete. Sponsor Daniel Reed insists sign-off is required for commercial reasons. What should you do? A. Follow Daniel and sign off to meet commercial timelines. B. Convene an emergency governance session to present the compliance risk, propose compensating controls or a limited scope release, and seek formal written approval if risk is accepted. C. Ask Marcus to sign and promise to complete testing post-release. D. Release to a subset of users without informing compliance. Correct answer: B. Explanation. Regulatory risk needs governance-level visibility and documented acceptance or compensating controls. Bypassing QA or hiding issues is unacceptable. 8. During an outage, sponsor Amina Khan tells you to bypass environmental approvals to speed deployment. Which 2 actions are appropriate? Select 2. A. Bypass approvals immediately because speed is critical. B. Document Amina's instruction, assess legal operational risk, and request expedited approvals via emergency change procedures. C. Escalate to governance if Amina lacks authority to waive approvals and involve compliance or legal. D. Deploy now and backdate approvals after stability is proven. Correct answers: B and C. Explanation. Even in crisis, document instructions and pursue emergency approval paths. Escalate if authority is insufficient. Bypassing or backdating approvals is non-compliant. 9. Program Manager Emily White sends a spreadsheet of live customer records to the test environment to reproduce a defect. The contract forbids using production data in non-production systems. What is your immediate action? A. Load the data to reproduce the defect because it's faster. B. Inform Emily the contract forbids this, delete the file, and offer to create an anonymized or synthetic dataset with security. C. Ignore the spreadsheet and proceed without reproducing. D. Forward the spreadsheet to developers and ask them to sanitize it privately. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Contract and privacy obligations prohibit using production data. Decline, remove the file, and provide compliant alternatives. 10. VP of Sales. James Walker promises a client additional features to close a deal. Those features require a new paid module and extend the timeline. Which 2 actions should you take? Select 2. A. Start informal work to demonstrate progress because sales promised it. B. Inform sales in writing of scope, time, cost impacts, request that sales submit a formal change request and secure funding, and update release planning only after approval. C. Secretly rescope current deliverables to include the promised features. D. Escalate to the sponsor if sales cannot formalize the change and obtain funding promptly. Correct answers: B and D. Explanation. Sales commitments must be formalized into change requests with funding. Document impacts and escalate if sales fails to secure approval. Informal work or secret rescoping bypasses PMP Exam Express. We have a set of questions that deal with project closure. Let us get you ready for your exam. 1. 2 weeks before formal closeout, newly appointed COO Karen Ellis sends an executive mandate to project sponsor David Harper and you, PM Rachel Cole, demanding immediate project closeout so budget can be redeployed to an urgent enterprise initiative. Operations Lead. Marcus Bell has documented a 3-week training and runbook completion plan with signed resource availability and a staged cutover timeline. The contract requires formal operational acceptance before final invoicing, and the SLAs include penalties for production outages. The PMO head insists the sponsor's executive directive should be followed. Which is the best course of action? A. Refuse Karen's directive and insist on Marcus's 3-week plan, risking executive escalation. B. Immediately close and hand over to operations despite incomplete training, then manage any fallout. C. Transfer responsibility to the PMO and remove the project team from operational accountability. D. Propose a 3-phase handover to Karen and David. 1. Minimal essential services immediate cutover with documented risk acceptance. 2. 3 weeks of shadow support by project SMEs with daily KPI gates. 3. Staged operational sign-offs tied to roll-forward authority and conditional final acceptance. Correct answer: D. Explanation. A phased handover with documented time-bound risk acceptance and daily KPI gates balances executive urgency and operational readiness while protecting contractual obligations and traceability. 2. During final acceptance, sponsor Aisha Khan announces the business owner Priya Rao is resigning effective next week, and no successor has been named. The client's commercial team, VP Sales Mark Ellis, pressures for immediate sign-off to meet quarter-end revenue recognition thresholds. The contract requires an operational owner to accept ongoing support responsibilities. You are PM Daniel Green. Legal warns that accepting sign-off without delegated authority transfers unresolved operational risk to your organization. Which action best preserves governance and meets the client deadline? A. Take the outgoing owner's verbal sign-off and close. B. Refuse sign-off until a new owner is appointed regardless of quarter end. C. Obtain conditional sign-off from a senior client sponsor, CFO or equivalent, with written delegated authority that final operational acceptance will occur when a named owner is appointed, and that any interim liabilities are acknowledged. D. Sign off yourself as PM to avoid delay and finalize invoices. Correct answer: C. Explanation. Conditional sign-off from a senior sponsor with documented delegation preserves governance, protects against orphaned operational obligations, and allows quarter-end commercial processes to proceed. 3. 48 hours before handover, your subcontractor, OpsDocs Ledadadir, notifies you they are insolvent. Their scope included the operations runbook, emergency procedures, and handover scripts. An earlier approved scope reduction during change control shortened subcontractor QA time to meet deadlines. You, PM Olivia Reed, discover critical runbook gaps during the pre-handover checklist. Missing rollback scripts, absent escalation contacts, and unvalidated live failover steps. The client's environment is production sensitive and the launch cannot be delayed more than 5 working days. Which 2 immediate actions best protect users and the organization? Select 2. 8. Pause formal acceptance, engage legal and procurement immediately, and initiate an in-house rapid completion sprint using SMEs and subject matter consultants with staged operational sign-offs. B. Escalate to sponsor, CIO Vikram Patel, to request immediate emergency funding and resource reallocation to complete the runbook and verify operations before acceptance. C. Proceed with handover and log the runbook gaps as post-closure tasks assigned to the PMO. D. Draft a temporary operations playbook covering critical failure modes only, and push for conditional acceptance with a tightly controlled remediation and verification plan. Correct answers: A and B. Explanation: pausing acceptance while mobilizing legal, procurement, and sponsor resources enables rapid, controlled remediation. Emergency funding and SME reallocation are necessary to close operational gaps before live cutover. 4. 5 days prior to planned closeout, incoming CIO Laura Mitchell issues a directive that all historical project artifacts must be migrated to the newly procured enterprise repository, REPOX, and tagged with new metadata taxonomy. REPOX onboarding for the project will take 4 weeks. The closure milestone is contractual and triggers vendor final payments and project release. The archival team says migration now will cause unacceptable schedule slippage. As PM Noah Clark, you must reconcile the CIO mandate, contractual closeout, and archival controls. What is the pragmatic resolution? A. Complete closeout into the current, contract-compliant repository. Formally document the CIO's new mandate and schedule a time-boxed, auditable migration to REPOX with validation and reconciliation checks once onboarding is complete. B. Stop all closure activities until REPOX onboarding completes. C. Upload artifacts to REPOX immediately without applying required metadata to satisfy the CIO. D. Print physical copies of artifacts and deliver them to the CIO as a temporary workaround. Correct answer: A. Explanation. Closing into a compliant repository preserves contractual milestones while documenting and planning a controlled, auditable migration to satisfy the CIO without breaching contract timelines. 5. During handover operations, originally negotiated a 6-month dedicated support rota with named staff and escalation matrices. Mid-handover, the head of operations, Simon Holt, is replaced by interim head Lena Iyer, who demands the rota be shortened to 2 months to reduce costs. Vendors have already scheduled contractors dependent on the 6-month plan. As PM Priya Sharma, how do you resolve competing commitments? A. Immediately cut the rota to 2 months to comply with Lena's direction. B. Propose maintaining the agreed 6-month rota, but include a KPI-based step-down clause that allows staged reduction after 2 months if defined operational stability metrics are met, with documented triggers and responsibilities. C. Insist the original 6 months remain immutable regardless of the new head's requests. D. Cancel the rota and default responsibility to the PMO. Correct answer: B. Explanation. A KPI-triggered step-down preserves service stability, honors the original commitment during transition, and provides a data-driven pathway for the interim head to shorten support if metrics permit. 6. At final documentation handover, the new procurement director, Eleanor Price, asks you to retroactively amend supplier warranties and SLAs to shift more risk to your organization to satisfy a consolidated enterprise procurement policy. The contract is signed and vendor acceptance was obtained under prior terms. The vendor warns they will refuse further work if terms change without compensation. Which two actions preserve contract integrity and closure? Select 2. A. Apply the requested contract amendments retroactively and finalize closure to please procurement. B. Provide procurement verbal assurance that terms will be revisited later without formal records. C. Log procurement's request, escalate to legal and finance for contractual and commercial review, and require formal change control and vendor agreement before any contractual amendment. D. Close under the existing contracted terms now and open a formal post-closure change order process for any SLA warranty changes with explicit risk allocation, pricing, and vendor consent. Correct answers, C and D. Explanation. Contract changes require legal and commercial review and vendor agreement. Closing on current terms while initiating a formal change order preserves contractual integrity and avoids unilateral exposure. 7. 3 weeks after closure, a major client reports selective data loss correlated with your archived migration. New head of data, Carlos Mendez, replaces the previous contact and publicly insists the project accept fault and provide immediate remediation and compensation. The migration vendor, Data Migrate Lendiad, claims their logs show successful transfers, and your team's migration runbook shows a last-minute archive filter rule was applied based on a product owner direction. As PM Sarah Liu, what is the appropriate first operational step? A. Immediately accept full fault and draft a unilateral compensation package. B. Deny responsibility and refer the client to the vendor exclusively. C. Convene an incident review with Carlos, Data Migrate, Legal, and your engineering leads. Commission forensics to validate the migration logs, identify root cause, and prepare an evidence-based remediation and contractual claim path. D. Ignore the client's escalation, hoping the issue will not be pursued. Correct answer. C. Explanation. An evidence-based incident review with forensic analysis and legal involvement determines liability and remediation obligations while protecting contractual rights. 8. The project closed last month with closure documentation signed by former CIO Robert Lang. The new CIO, Aditi Sharma, now demands a mandatory architecture review and wants closure artifacts reopened for technical changes. The closure certificates show all governance approvals were obtained under the former CIO. As PM Tom Baker, how do you handle the new CIO's request? A. Reopen closure artifacts immediately and implement requested changes without further approvals. B. Treat the request as a post-closure change. Run formal change control to assess impacts, costs, compliance, and obtain reapproval from governance bodies before modifying closed artifacts. C. Refuse the CIO's request citing final sign-off by the previous CIO. D. Archive the CIO's request without taking action. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Post-closure changes must follow change control and governance. Reassessment, impact analysis, and reapproval are required before reopening signed closure artifacts. 9. During transition, the client's service owner role changed 3 times in 6 weeks. Outgoing owner left with incomplete knowledge transfer Interim owner rescheduled TGDs repeatedly, and the third appointee is remote and unavailable for workshops. Handover tasks are incomplete and critical operational runbooks remain unvalidated. You, PM Hannah Price, need to restore closure momentum under that churn. Which two actions most effectively recover momentum? Select 2. A. Escalate to sponsor, CIO or equivalent, and regional leads to secure a stable delegate or formal interim owner with delegated authority, set firm acceptance deadlines, and obtain written confirmation of responsibilities. B. Produce a prioritized critical handover pack that isolates the top 10 critical runbook items and run focused, recorded workshops, and rapid verification sessions to transfer essential knowledge immediately. C. Stop all handover activity until the service owner stabilizes permanently. D. Absorb all outstanding handover tasks into the PMO and keep them on the project backlog indefinitely. Correct answers: A and B. Explanation: escalation to secure a stable delegate combined with prioritized, pragmatic handover packs and targeted workshops restores critical knowledge transfer and preserves momentum despite organizational churn. 10. 1 week before legal sign-off, the client's new VP Legal, Monica Reyes, imposes stricter data retention and e-discovery clauses that conflict with the previously agreed contract and planned closeout. The original contract baseline allowed shorter retention, and the vendor payments and final project closure depend on sign-off. As PM Ethan Ross, how do you resolve this without breaching commitments? A. Immediately accept VP Legal's changes and patch the contract without review. B. Destroy records to match the previous shorter retention schedule and avoid new obligations. C. Refuse to engage and leave the client to resolve internally. D. Proceed to close on the existing contract baseline to meet obligations, document VP Legal's requested amendments, and open a formal contract amendment process to negotiate phased implementation, cost implications, and legal accountability. Correct answer: D. Explanation. Closing on the agreed contract while formally processing the VP Legal's changes via a documented amendment avoids breach, clarifies costs and responsibilities, and preserves contractual integrity. Hi there. This is Mark. Welcome back to PMP Exam Express. We have interesting questions on Agile methodology. Test your knowledge with these questions and measure how ready you are for the exam. Let's get into it. 1. Midway through a 2-week sprint, a critical security vulnerability is discovered in a third-party library used by multiple stories. Remediation needs 3-4 developer days and a full regression cycle. Product owner Neha Iyer insists the sprint goal must be met. Stakeholders request an immediate external communication, and DevSecOps lead Rajesh Kumar recommends a hotfix branch with emergency CI gating. As Scrum Master Ananya Singh, what is the best immediate action? A. Convene the team and Neha for an immediate re-estimate. Negotiate scope trade-offs to include remediation only if the sprint goal remains viable, and use emergency branching with CI gating if the team agrees. B. Defer remediation to the next sprint because sprint scope is fixed. C. Implement the hotfix branch unilaterally and keep the sprint backlog unchanged. D. Halt all sprint work and allocate full team capacity to remediation until resolved. Correct answer: A. Explanation. Team replanning with negotiated scope trade-offs preserves Scrum empiricism, balances risk, and uses branching only if the team confirms capacity and risk mitigation. 2. During PI planning, a cross-cutting compliance epic is identified requiring synchronous changes across 6 teams, 2 third-party APIs, and a formal regulatory audit package. As release train engineer Vikram Sharma, which approach best minimizes integration and audit risk? A. Assign the epic to one team to coordinate and make others follow. B. Defer the epic to the next PI to avoid complexity. C. Let each team implement its own compliance approach and reconcile later. D. Create a cross-ART integration increment, negotiate explicit dependency commitments, allocate buffer stories for integration, instrumentation, and schedule joint verification and audit rehearsals during the PI. Correct answer. D. Explanation. A coordinated cross-ART increment with explicit dependencies, integration buffers, and rehearsal of audit evidence reduces systemic risk and aligns verification. 3. Kanban metrics for Team Phoenix show rising WWIP in testing and UAT, mean cycle time increases and deliveries become bursty. Prior remedies, adding testers over time, didn't help. Which two actions best restore flow? Select 2. A. Increase batch sizes to amortize overhead and reduce context switching. B. Enforce WIP limits at testing and UAT stages and apply upstream pull signals so new work starts only when capacity frees up. C. Run time-boxed swarming and focused unblock sessions to clear bottlenecks and reduce cycle time. D. Remove exit criteria so work can flow faster into production. Correct answers B and C. Explanation: strict WIP limits with upstream pull restore flow control while swarming targets bottlenecks to reduce cycle time. Larger batches or removing criteria typically worsen flow. 4. Product owner Suresh Patel routinely overrides team estimates during sprint planning by reassigning story points and compressing scope without team agreement, causing velocity volatility for Scrum Master Meera Rao. What corrective action most effectively restores forecasting and team ownership? A. Escalate to portfolio management to enforce estimate discipline. B. Facilitate a calibration session using reference stories. Re-establish collaborative estimation, planning poker, and require team consensus on points before sprint commitment. C. Require Suresh to submit business cases for each change to a committee. D. Replace story points with time estimates assigned by the PO. Correct answer: B. Explanation. Team calibration with reference stories and collaborative estimation restores shared understanding and consistent velocity inputs. 5. Team Asha's sprint predictability is undermined by frequent external approval gates that take days. Delivery manager Rohan Verma asks for a quick improvement. Which single intervention most directly addresses the root cause? A. Increase sprint length to accommodate approval delays. B. Move all approval tasks into a separate backlog and handle them asynchronously. C. Establish SLAs for external approvals, formalize a stakeholder RACI with named approvers, and reserve explicit sprint capacity for expected approval work. D. Stop accepting any work requiring external approvals into sprints. Correct answer: C. Explanation. SLAs, a clear RACI and reserved capacity, manage external variability pragmatically and improve sprint reliability. 6. A Scrum team uses trunk-based development and continuous deployment. Their definition of done still reads, release to production, causing confusion with CI/CD practice. As Agile coach Priyanka Desai, which two reconciliations are most appropriate? Select 2. A. Keep the DoD unchanged and only release at sprint boundaries. B. Remove production readiness from the DoD and treat CI/CD artifacts as non-increments. C. Require feature flags and pipeline gating to decouple release timing from DoD. D. Redefine DoD to production-ready releasable increment and use pipeline gating and feature flags so releases occur when the business decides. Correct answers: D and A. Explanation: redefining DoD as releasable increment and using feature flags gating aligns Scrum with CD. Temporarily keeping a release-oriented DoD may be used during transitional governance alignment. 7. During backlog refinement, many epics lack acceptance criteria and are too large. PO Kavita Nair is unavailable for discovery. What is the most effective next step to improve backlog readiness? A. Estimate the epics using high story points and proceed. B. Push the epics into the next PI without further refinement. C. Run time-boxed discovery spikes with SMEs, create definition of ready checks, and slice epics into vertical testable stories with clear acceptance criteria before pulling into sprints. D. Freeze the backlog until Kavita returns. Correct answer: C. Explanation: time-boxed spikes, DOR enforcement, and vertical slicing with acceptance criteria reduce sprint risk and enable predictable delivery. 8. A program increment is blocked intermittently by a regulatory reviewer whose availability window is narrow. Program Manager Arjun Mehta must reduce gating risk. Which two mitigations are most effective? Select 2. A. Defer regulated features until regulator availability improves. B. Outsource liaison duties to a contracted compliance specialist embedded in ART teams with contractual SLAs. C. Rely on ad hoc manual evidence packages prepared at the end of the PI. D. Establish a dedicated compliance cadence, early evidence collection track, scheduled regulator rehearsals, and local regulatory contacts embedded in ARTs. Correct answers: D and B. Explanation: embedding regulatory rehearsals and evidence automation reduces gating risk, while a contracted, SLA-bound specialist can provide dedicated regulatory coordination if tightly integrated. 9. Distributed team retrospectives produce actions, but closure rates are near zero and impediments recur. Agile lead Anil Gupta needs to restore continuous improvement. Which immediate policy change most likely achieves this? A. Require visible owners, time-boxed improvement experiments, and mandatory follow-up on action items in the next retrospective with stakeholder reporting. B. Stop documenting action items and rely on verbal commitments. C. Move retrospective actions to a centralized program backlog owned by PMO. D. Outsource retrospective facilitation permanently. Correct answer: explanation. Visible ownership, time-boxed experiments, and mandatory follow-up create accountability and increase action item closure rates. 10. Team Vikram's CI pipeline allows multiple failing builds to be merged into mainline, causing regressions. Tech lead Kunal Joshi argues occasional instability is acceptable to protect velocity. Which corrective policy most directly enforces mainline quality? A. Relies solely on manual testers to catch regressions after merges. B. Allow unstable merges but expand downstream tests. C. Enforce branch protection. Block merges unless pipeline passes, require merge requests with passing automated tests, and enable automatic rollback on regression detection. D. Freeze feature work until the pipeline is fully fixed. Correct answer. C. Explanation. Pipeline gating with branch protection and automated rollback enforces mainline integrity and reduces regressions.